event. We would love for you to join join our listserv so you can hear more about other opportunities to learn about issues related to equity. So to kick off today, we have Dr. Sobia Khan. Dr. Khan is the provost of East and Lake Nona campuses at Valencia College, Florida. She's the inaugural Aspen Prize-winning College of Community College Excellence, which is serving more than 16,000 students at the two campuses. Previously, she served as the Dean of Academic Success at San Antonio College and won the 2021 Aspen Prize, overseeing academic and workforce programs. She was the Associate Dean of Oversight of Dual Enrollment in the English Department and Professor of English at Richland campus of Dallas College. She's also served as the AANAPISI Asian American Native American Pacific Islander Grant Project Director and Vice President of Faculty Association during her time at Richland. Dr. Khan earned her PhD from the University of Texas at Dallas, her dissertation on transnational identities in crisis. Her dissertation was published in June of 2022 by Routledge. Dr. Khan's educational and career choices have been driven by her service to the community. She views education as the tool through which she can serve the community, especially those who are under-resourced and marginalized, by creating opportunities based on the principles of equity and justice. And that passion has been seen in the numerous numbers of grants and initiatives that she has developed across her time in academia. So I will say no more and turn it over to Dr. Khan. Dr. Khan, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation and for the opportunity to share with you all a little bit about my experience and a little bit about the work that I have been on. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Might take a minute, so please bear with me. It did work perfectly well a minute before, so there's no reason it shouldn't now. Excellent. I hope you can see my screen. I'm here today to really talk about equity in the classroom, but also beyond the classroom. And the book that you are seeing on the screen, Beyond Equity at Community Colleges, Bringing Theory into Practice for Justice and Liberation, was a work of love and hope by Dr. Kendra Unruh, who will be joining us along with other panelists later in the hour, to really dig deep into what does it mean to have this privilege of teaching and leading a space in higher ed. And my own background and Kendra's background stems in theory, which is what I did at University of Texas at Dallas, theory with literature and the intersections of it. So I truly believe some of the theories that I started with and theories that others have really engaged with, how do we move those theories into practice? I'm a believer that theoretical work, unless put into practice, leaves much to be wanted. So here, we're very proud to share the book that came out this June. And if you feel so, please feel free to look it up at routledge.com, and it is readily available. So with that, let me share my undergraduate commencement ceremony photo. If you can see, I thought I would begin with home, and Dallas is home. UT Dallas is home. Richland College, where I went to school, is home. This is my undergrad photo with 3 kids. But the funny thing is, as I was going through my undergraduate education, I never really talked about who I was or why I was making the choices that I was making. It was never something that came to the forefront. It was never something that was discussed. These 3 kids are now fully grown and still in the University of Texas system. So not only I, but my kids too have been part of the UT system. What really I'm going to try and communicate today is that knowing and understanding our students is so integral to supporting them inside the classroom and outside. I remember I was choosing courses during the daytime between the hours of 9 to 12 when the youngest one was in kindergarten, because that was the only time I could take classes. And thus I ended up taking the same instructor 4 times. Not because I loved the instructor, but because that instructor taught in the time frame that I was looking at. And I remember the instructor being the sage on the stage, was at the podium and literally just spoke at us throughout. This is not to say all instructors were like that. There were many different and some that just moved my heart. But that was my initial experience I graduated in 2006. So I think my experience as a full-time student started perhaps maybe 3 years before my graduation at UT Dallas. But it remains a question, like how much do we know our students and how can we support them inside the classroom and outside? Some hard questions that Kendra and I asked ourselves as we went into this endeavor and invited experts across the nation to share what they thought and what they had done to put into practice some key ways of supporting our students. And the questions are listed here. Thoughts that we really want to reckon with. What do we believe that people deserve and why? Do we even know our students or understand our students? How much do we care about our students, especially the most vulnerable students who are often misunderstood, marginalized, and often overlooked? And then the ultimate question is every student in our classroom succeeding? And what are we doing to ensure their success? These were some of the questions that we asked ourselves as we started delving into why is this book even needed? Why should we invite others and ourselves to think through these questions? And it all led to really understanding what is equity. I hope you can see this. I'm not sure how I can make it bigger, but hopefully you have a good visual. This is a visual of what led us to really think through how do we put equity how do we explain equity in a way that is easily understandable to practitioners and educators. And in truth, the reality is that education, higher ed, is a very privileged space, and that's where you see in the first photograph. Some students have a lot of privileges and thus they are able to look beyond the barriers or have so much privilege that they don't even have any barriers. And they are leaps and bounds ahead of their counterparts who may not be as privileged. And then equality is, well, what we recognize that this is not a fair system. Thus, we should provide equal kind of support systems inside and outside the classroom that brings everyone to a level plane, which is what you see in the second visual. Equity is then beginning to understand that no, not everyone, that if we do the same or we offer the same kind of support and systems and do things equally is inadequate. So let's be ready for the students that we see. So thus, in the third visual, you see some students need more support, some students need less, and others don't need any. And thus, we are at a place where we have done due diligence and everyone can have a barrier-free experience of some sort. The book really invites us, and here I am today, and Kendra, and all our contributors of this book are inviting us to really think through what does it mean to be really justice-centered, to even look beyond equity and to remove all barriers. So there are no barriers, and then we can truly have an open, free, unlimited access to education, support systems, and success. So access, which will lead to success. And that's where justice and eventually liberation with freedom of choice comes in. So this, I thought, might be a good meme to share. And if you look it up, and maybe a colleague, maybe Kendra, you could drop a link in the chat so folks can look at some of these memes themselves. But when I really think, so this will only happen, that way of looking through reality, going into equality, equity, and then towards justice and liberation is only possible if we really understand our students. Do we know who our students are? So I did a little digging into University of Texas at Dallas's students and student population. I have limited access, so I'll confess I may not have all the data, but once you kind of start looking at data, we start to see a really good picture of what is happening. Who are our students? So here's what I learned. In fall of 2021, the students' ethnicity and the number of students UT Dallas serves is thus. Asian Americans make up 40% of the student population, Anglos at 26%, Hispanic 18%, African American 6%, international 4%, two or more races 4%, unknown or others 2%, Native American students make up 0.1%, and Native Hawaiian make 0.1%. Another deeper understanding is the gender type. At UT Dallas, we serve 56% male students and 44% female students. 80% of the students are full-time, 20% are part-time, and undergraduate students make up 72% of the total population, and graduate students make 28%. So this is fabulous. This is a good data point, and the total enrollment is 29,696. Let me go a little further. What I also discovered, and this, I'm sorry, probably is absolutely not visible because I'm unable to see it clearly. But what I'm trying to show here is that, can someone let me know if this is visible at all?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, perfect. The aid awarded to undergraduate students 2021 to 2022. This came as a little bit of a shocker to me, that despite the number of students we're serving and all the practices to bring in students, UT Dallas has majority of their students on financial aid that are both need-based and non-need-based. A large amount of different kinds of federal funding, state funding, scholarships and grants are being awarded to the students. And you can see there, it goes into millions of dollars. And so that's something to keep in mind, that many of the students UT Dallas is serving are on financial aid of some sort, whether it's Pell Grants, need-based, and their parents are also involved, not all, but some parents are also supporting students. So that's just something to keep in mind when a student is in front of us. There are still trappings of constraints around them. And it might be due to a myriad of reasons that I'm unable to uncover, but that maybe instructors and UT Dallas faculty and staff can start to uncover that what are the needs of the students who are financially bound through scholarships. Humor me. What I dug further and found out that the 4-year graduation rate at UT Dallas is 58%. Excellent. The 6-year graduation rate is 73%, and overall 88% of freshmen returned. These are fabulous numbers. Again, these numbers actually show that UT Dallas has students who are committed to learning, and a majority of them are succeeding. These are excellent numbers compared to national benchmarks. But when I think about the students that UT Dallas is serving, and in trying to understand the community, because I'll confess, I'm a community college administrator, educator. My beginnings as a professional educator are at a community college, so I'm always centered in the community and the place. Who are the people that we are serving? And you saw the demographics listed. But here is where Texas is, and I'll take just a minute to steer us into this conversation and bring us back. North Texas, actually, and Dallas-Fort Worth has the largest population increase over the last 15 years or so has been in Hispanic population. This graph on the right will show 37.9, almost 40% of the Dallas-Fort Worth population is actually Hispanic. White population is much less. Black population is around 20%, and so on and so forth. Another way of looking at it is here where we can see Dallas in itself, actually, the largest population is Hispanic population, which is in yellow, which is in orange, and DFW as a whole still has a very large Hispanic population. What this graph, this table will shows is the educational attainment of persons aged 25 and older by race and ethnicity, and this data is from 2019, just before the pandemic. And here we can start to begin to see the disparities, right? The upper yellow and gray show higher ed and some college or associate's degree, and the yellow actually shows bachelor, graduate, or professional degree attainment. So the least number of degree attainment is by far in our Hispanic and our African American or Black population. These are the numbers. And the highest is among the Asian population, and non-Hispanic white or sits somewhere in the middle. So in truth, as I am kind of going into looking at equity, I'm also asking all of you who are employees, faculty and staff, I understand at UT Dallas, is to really question the enrollment and the graduation rates, which are so incredibly high and fabulous, but they're not representative of the city and the community that the Dallas-Fort Worth area is seeking, which hopefully will lead you to more questions and asking why that is. So my purpose here is to just give you an opportunity to delve into something. As we're talking about equity, we cannot talk about equity without talking about access. I want to leave this nugget with you. So coming back to the original question for which I've been invited is to really think through what is equity in the classroom? How are we ensuring our students are succeeding? And how much do we care about our students, especially the most vulnerable students who are often misunderstood, marginalized, and often overlooked? What I could not find in the data sets that were accessible to me were graduation rates, disaggregated by ethnicity and gender. I would be super interested in knowing the graduation rates and the returning student rates of disaggregated by ethnicity, and I hope some of you will look into that. What we are trying to do in the book is actually examine all these kinds of questions, and our work in this collection aims to showcase ways in which we identify barriers and eradicate them, create opportunities of belonging, and create a learning environment that centers justice for our students. Higher ed classrooms are more than just rooms where content is delivered. They are institutions of social justice and liberation, sites of collaboration and innovation, and of democratizing education. And the essays show how higher ed classrooms can be student-ready and learner-centered, meet students where they are, and enhance their sense of belonging, which leads to success. So the questions I raised about representation, access to the population of Dallas-Fort Worth ties into what do we mean by democratizing education? Where does UT Dallas fit in? So these are some of the questions I'm interested. The book leads us to some findings, right? One of the findings is that luck should have nothing to do with a student's success. Everything should be systemic, intentional, and by design. Frontline faculty and staff are the real change makers. Every action has the potential to become transformational rather than transactional. Support and challenge faculty. We should all support and challenge faculty and staff to experiment, recreate, and explore ways of engaging students. We should trust the experts who are working with the students. Student Ready Institute of Higher Learning recognizes and understands its diverse student population, accepts students as they are, and rises to meet student needs. Here, you will see a shift in the narrative, where we are asking all of us to become more learner-centered, more student-oriented, rather than students cater to every instructor's different needs. We try to understand where a student is and how to bring them along, because learning is so individual. Every human being that comes into the classroom comes as a whole person. When I was into the classroom, I came as a whole person with faculty, with children, with young children, with a cultural background that was very dissimilar to my colleagues, to my peers, being a student, where my student identity wasn't the priority. It was one of my identities, but not the only primary identity. So kind of bringing in cultural experiences, cultural capital, and learning what the student experiences into the classroom can enhance the way students feel connected and have a sense of belonging in the classroom. We also want to raise in this book, it is inadequate to have the same systems in place for all students because one size does not fit all. And liberatory practices in and outside the classrooms are intentional and by design. This has become more so post-pandemic, or as inequities and injustices were laid bare by COVID-19 and by the killing of George Floyd. And we really want all of us in this room together and every educator to reimagine classrooms as a space for justice. We started with our talk today. I started the talk today with really thinking about justice and liberation, and that's where I feel, and my colleagues who have contributed to the book feel, that we can reimagine and be enactors of justice in the classroom. I'll just briefly highlight, we have just amazing essays included in the book, some of which really center on different parts of a institute of higher learning. The example up here is of an essay that focuses on institutional racial justice theory into writing center practices. And I don't have the time today, but the essay highlights how reimagining and really looking at Luke Wood's theory of the D3 effect increased success for Latinx, Asian, White, and African American students. We also in the book have equity practices at the end of every chapter, which means that after reading the chapter as a reference point, there's a list of just really practical advice that you can take into your own experience and adopt and adapt as you feel necessary. Another great example I'd like to share of an essay is Mila Jean Yap's Centering from the Margins, the Standpoint of Women of Color STEM Majors in the Community College. Everything she talks about in the context of a community college is applicable to four-year institutes just as much. And the biggest premise she wants us to really remember is that ask the students what they need. Survey students, ask them what their needs are, how does learning happen for them, and then work from there forward. Again, her essay is also followed by equity practices. And the last essay that I'm going to highlight for today's talk is Relational Poverty Theory in Praxis at San Antonio College. And this essay really looks at relational poverty theory and how these two faculty leaders adopted and adapted and really thought through how this theory can be put into practice in an advocacy center that looks at food insecurity and housing insecurity. And so with that, I'm going to leave us with, oh, by the way, this is the picture of the advocacy center that started with just questions and 5 years worth of work, and eventually into this beautiful space that any student can walk into and get the help they need. So in conclusion, Through this book, Kendra and I and our contributors claim that every student belongs at our colleges, irrespective of their level of college readiness, background, or any other marker. What if we imagined a future forward and justice focused system which identifies each student's strengths, assets, and needs based on their lived cultural and educational experience as soon as the student enters our college, so we can provide a learner focused educational experience for the students. And with that, I'm going to end the talk because I see I am at time. But I hope the next 25 minutes or so, as the panelists come forward, we'll start to really delve into what does it mean to go further and delve further into these questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. Next up, we are going to have a panel of guests to talk a little bit further about this subject, and then we're going to close with Q&A. So attendees, feel free along the way if you want to pop into the chat your questions. We'll save them for the Q&A time, but it's great to go ahead and start populating that. So on our panel, we have 4 speakers, and then Dr. Khan will pop back in for the Q&A at the end. We have Dr. Kendra Unruh. She's a full-time English faculty member at Dallas College, Richland campus. She has published journal articles about her dissertation research on Lindy Hop and is a co-editor of the Beyond Equity of Community Colleges text or book that Dr. Khan introduced us to. In her role at Dallas College, she has served on many committees dedicated to equity and justice for the marginalized students and has conducted training sessions about creating a sense of belonging in the classroom. Next, we have Dr. Selena Brody. She is a professor of instruction in psychology and assistant director for the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Texas at Dallas, which again, I'd like to thank the Center for Teaching and Learning for their co-sponsorship of this event today. Dr. Brody holds a PhD in social psychology from the University of California, Santa Cruz, with a specialization in prejudice reduction and intergroup relations, and has completed her undergraduate degree in psychology at Boston College. Dr. Brody is an enthusiastic teacher, public speaker, and trainer who brings many awards to the table. Her expertise is in diversity, equity, and inclusion as a scholar practitioner, and she was featured in the 21 American Psychological Association book, Navigating Difficult Moments in Teaching Diversity and Social Justice. Also on our panel is Brecken Hunter Wellborn. He is a PhD student and a teaching associate in the Visual and Performing Arts program at UTD. His research focuses on cultural representation in America, genre film. Before joining the UTD community, Brecken served as a student success coordinator at the University of North Texas, where he won the university's Diversity Award for fostering inclusive student support. Lastly, we have Iris Wu. Iris is a third-year student at the University of Texas at Dallas, where she is pursuing a degree in literature. She is also the current recipient of the Academic Excellence Scholarship and is part of the Honors College. Iris is originally from Beijing, China, and she's a research assistant at the Center for Asian Studies here at UTD. So thank you, panelists. They're going to turn on their cameras, and we'll go in order as introduced for their remarks.
Hi, I guess that means I'm starting. I'm Dr. Kendra Unruh. I am the co-editor of Beyond Equity at Community Colleges, which Sobia spoke a lot about today. Something that I wanted to kind of focus on that Sobia and I talk about in our introduction, and that kind of leads us more to this idea of justice and what justice really means for our students, is the idea that student success is not always what we as the professor or as the institution think of as student success. Oh, you guys can't see me?
I can
okay,
see.
let me.
Which is strange.
Can you see me now?
No. I mean, I can see you, yes. I don't. And it looks like
Yes.
Iris can see it.
I can see.
I can see.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll continue on. Often as institutions, we think of student success in the terms that the state of Texas thinks of that, which is retention rates and graduation rates. And so we're always trying to get those retention rates up. We're always trying to get the graduation rates up. And that's something that, you know, we have to do because that's what the state requires. And our funding comes from those means. But if we're really going to look into justice and what justice means for our students, we also need to think about what is success for them. And when we're thinking about students who are marginalized, students who come from backgrounds where, you know, they're the first generation in college, or they may not have a lot of money. And so they're working several jobs in order to just take one class a semester. Their graduation rate is probably going to be a lot more than 4 or 5 years. And that doesn't mean that that student is not succeeding. That means that student is succeeding in the way that is best for them to maintain relationships with their family, for them to advance the career that they might already be in, for them to have a life outside of school that is fulfilling for them. And that doesn't mean that that is not success. The same thing for many students of color who are dealing with institutionalized racism on a daily basis. They just may not have the energy to be putting forth the amount of labor or work that we as a professor think that they should be putting into our classes. Whether that is, you know, they're just trying to get that C to pass, or they're just trying to get through the semester and build some skills, which maybe means next semester they take the class again and do get that C. So that's something that we talked a little bit about in the introduction of our book. And I think that was really enlightening for me when I started doing the research to think about, you know, I was the overachieving student. And so when I see my students who aren't trying to get the A and do everything they can, then I start to think of them as not being successful. And so it had to be that shift in mindset for me as an educator to think about, again, that question of, you know, who are my students and what is important to them, not just what is important to me or what is important to my institution or the state of Texas. What is most important for them to feel like they have succeeded and that they have, that we have achieved justice for them. And I think one of the examples that Sobia gave in the PowerPoint was one that I wrote down that I kind of wanted to talk about during my my response here, was the one of the writing center, where the authors talk about the different things that they did in that writing center to achieve justice. And one of the equity practices that they talked about is letting the students use their Black vernacular in their writing, telling the students, your instructors might mark you down for this. You might lose points for this, but we affirm that that is your language and that is your voice. And if that's the way you want to write, then you should have power over an agency over your own writing, and that is okay. And giving students that option and affirming for them that there is nothing wrong with their language, that they should be using their voice. And as a composition instructor, that really stuck with me and really meant a lot to me, because several of the essays in our book talk about language autonomy and achieving justice by allowing students to express their voices. And I think that's something that is really important for some of us to remember, that what we think of as correct grammar and right grammar and the best language is not always the best language for our students, because it feels like it's taking away their voice and taking away their power over their writing and their ability to be who they are, which is really, one of the most important things that we're trying to affirm for our students is we respect you, and we really we value you for who you are, not just, we're trying to change you to fit this certain mold that we think of. And the last thing I want to mention real quickly is that a lot of the essays in this book really talk about empathy, and not just having empathy for our students, but also including things in the classroom, these different equity practices that can help foster empathy in our students for people who are different than they are. And one of the essays talks about a world building activity in a composition classroom that really helps students build ideas of what a world includes and how diverse populations can contribute to that world. And so that classroom practice also helps them have empathy for their fellow students and people who aren't like them. So I think empathy is really also a big centerpiece in justice work. And that looks like I'm about out of time. So thank you very much.
I think I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Selena Brody, and I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. I'm a social psychologist by training, and I'm a professor of instruction here. And I also work for the Center for Teaching and Learning. I actually got my professional start teaching in community college. I taught community college for 14 years, and so I'm very excited about this book and the conversation to help us better understand our students here at UT Dallas, many of whom also had their start at community college. And so I was very excited when I heard Dr. Khan give us some context for who we are at UTD. And I have some other things to add, which kind of help tell the story for those of us who are at UTD and want to better understand our students. And so when we think about first generation students and some of the hidden rules and curriculum that help make college, successful, however we're going to define that for them. 21% of our undergrads here at UTD are first generation. And when we look at some other factors, when they say they might lack access to software needed for courses, of our, and this is 2021 data, 15% of our students say that their lack of access could prevent them from full course participation. And so that's a lot of students, right? 15% just don't have what we might expect them to have on the first day of class. A lot of our students are working. Based on fall 2021 data, when we look at our first year students, 22% expect that they will work more than 20 hours per week while also taking classes. And so if our assumption is that if they're taking a full load, that's a full-time job as a student, they're doing like a whole other job on top of that. When we look at our transfer students, that number is even higher. 48% of our transfer students, and so these are folks who most likely came from a two-year institution and they got here in their third year. About half of them are working more than 20 hours a week while also taking a full load. And sometimes it's even more than a full load because they are trying to, maybe load extra things on year round in order to be able to return to what they need to do or to move on with their lives. When we look at our who is a commuter student, 35% of our students are commuting. And so when we're maybe even making suggestions for our student success, like, join a club, go to club meetings, I'm always trying to suggest that that's a great thing for students to do to make friends. But what we hear from a lot of our students is, I can't make any of the meetings. I can't show up at these times that are maybe in the middle of the day when I'm working or already left campus. Or sometimes I can't even make it to class because gas right now is cost prohibitive. Thankfully, it's gone down a little bit, but it's still really expensive for many of our students to just get to class. And so what many of our students are saying that they miss from the last 2 years is the ease to which they might have joined a live stream. So some classes have continued to live stream for students, and others faculty have made a choice for pedagogy that says, I would prefer to have all my students in the classroom, but understanding that there's complicated reasons for why students might not be coming in person, even though they maybe want to, is something that when I talk to faculty about, it sometimes means a mindset shift. Some of the things I really loved about what Dr. Khan was presenting about, I love this phrase, frontline faculty and staff, because it does really, it makes me kind of sit up a little bit straighter and think about my responsibility as a faculty member, and thinking about the ways that we can partner with folks on campus who are doing really excellent work to meet our first-gen students' needs and our transfer students' needs. So I am a big fan here at UT Dallas of the Office of Undergraduate Education and the programs that they do, particularly the first-gen network, and they do so much outreach. And as a faculty member, I was working here a few years before I knew that that's something that I could get involved in. And so finding ways that I can amplify, but also do my own thing to help students in my own classroom is great. So I do a session. I started doing a session that's really kind of redundant for what other people do, but it's coming from their professor. It's called Get in the Noti with Dr. Brody, and it's just answering questions about, thank you for the laughter, answering questions about what was my path? What's it like to go to graduate school? And then I can tell them, hey, there's actually all these other programs and trainings on campus that you can learn more about the specific steps. And so I know I don't have a lot of time, but at CTL, the Center for Teaching and Learning, we do work with faculty to look at inclusive pedagogy, and we have a lot of recorded trainings. And so things like examining course policies, practices, and curriculum, things like universal design for learning, and examining the organizational culture, both in your classroom and in your department. Some of the quick ideas that we've tried to help faculty with, or including a syllabus statement about managing a life crisis and finding support, or doing a course audit, really thinking about how do religious practices, for example, affect attendance and student behaviors, thinking about your textbook and is it reflecting current terminology for social identities, doing a course audit for accessibility. Or things that we can start doing before classes start, like learning about our students before day one, sending out a short survey asking about them. So I love all of these questions about how much do we know our students, what do people believe that students deserve, and why. I think that's such an important question to think about. As a faculty member, I hope we would all want our students to master course knowledge, but I think a lot of us, when we were students ourselves, encountered professors who may have communicated otherwise, like only some of you are going to succeed and a lot of you may fail, and maybe this class isn't for anyone. And so that kind of language is it matters in the way that we approach our first day of class and our syllabus and so on. I'll stop there so others can have a chance to tell us their ideas too. So thank you so much.
Okay, so I think I am on. Hello, everyone. Dr. Brody, can you nod if you can hear me? just so I know if someone can hear me. Okay, great. I never know, but I'm always shouting anyway. So for me, my name is Brecken Hunter Wellborn. I use he, him pronouns, and I am someone who comes from a student success staff background and have now made my way into the classroom. And so I've had the fortunate opportunity of being able to translate a lot of those practices into what I'm doing in the classroom. And for me, that's really important because as a graduate student, one thing I really noticed is that in talking to a network of grads across all different universities across the country, is that there isn't a lot of pedagogical instruction for graduate students who are then expected to go into teaching or to immediately be thrust into teaching assistantships, associateships, etc. So modeling these equity practices, these behaviors, becomes absolutely crucial when we're in the classroom. So what I would like to do in my response here is to offer some of my equity practices inspired by the collected edition, which speaks to me as well, because I also got my start in community college. Shout out to community colleges here. So what I do is I think about, for me, equity, the intersection of equity and justice is based on inclusivity, which is kind of the vibe that we're getting here, right? Is that, do we know our students? Do they feel included? Do they feel welcome? And not in a sense of inclusion that sometimes gets co-opted to mean, does everyone feel perfectly safe in the classroom? You know, no uncomfortable topics, but inclusivity with the mindset that inclusion and fostering inclusive spaces means breaking down some of those barriers that we've addressed before by acknowledging them and finding ways to move beyond them. So the first equity practices that I'd like to offer relate to breaking down that barrier between student and instructor. Think of your students as collaborators. Get to know them, like we've talked about previously. Getting to know your students, who they are, is so important. Like Dr. Brody, I like to start my class with an introductory survey, ask them about their experience with this topic. I teach film studies, so people have at least some maybe knowledge of that in some way, shape, or form. And so ask them about their experiences. What do they know? What do they love? And using that as a tool to guide the learning. And included here also, I try to make pronoun sharing an absolute comfortable and standard practice in the classroom when we're introducing ourselves to each other, getting to know each other. And also following students' leads as collaborators in terms of due dates, times for exams, things like that. Ask them, ask your class, get to know what they need, what they want, and make it known that if certain folks need individual accessibility or individual access, that's okay. Let's have that conversation because I'm here for you. The second category of equity practices I have relate to structuring the syllabus, which I think there is one of the essays from the edited collection we've linked in the chat here. So what I like to do for film studies, and this applies differently across different subjects, is to destabilize the canon. What does it mean to have a canon of texts that are used in the classroom? How can we use those in new ways or use other texts outside of the canon that might more speak to a greater number of our students? How can we write socially conscious pedagogy into our course description and our learning objectives, many of which are required? You know, you have to have learning objectives for many syllabi, so why not include them? In film studies in particular, there becomes a question of, should identity-based topics become like their own individual week, or do we do them throughout? And my answer is, of course, do both, right? Give them the space that they need, but also include them all the way through your semester. And something that's really important is to acknowledge the influence of oppression. No matter what subject you're teaching, in some way, shape, or form, if you are teaching it in this particular context or this particular country, in this case, if we're talking about American education, it has been influenced in some way, shape, or form by white supremacy, patriarchy, etc. And so acknowledging that influence and then acknowledging or discussing how you can work beyond that, move beyond that, and make a more equitable field of study, I think is important. The third category that I have here is rethinking assessment for equity practices. Offer students options. Students love options because if you have multiple examples, if you have multiple texts, allow them multiple options, give them multiple prompts, and you'll find all of a sudden that students really flourish when they have more opportunity to take control of their learning. Now, that's not to say give them 1,000 options, because again, you are also a human person who has time constraints, but give them more options, allow their voice to be heard. Build in intentional grace in your assessment. Some people do this through the process of contract grading. I like to go with, if we have 12 short assignments, you only need to submit 10. right? Because I acknowledge that you have other things going on in your life, you have other commitments, you have other responsibilities, and so maybe we don't necessarily need all of those short assignments. We need something else. Also, something that I like to do is rethink the notion of high stakes, low stakes assignments. A lot of instructors use high stakes, low stakes assignments. That's not my preferred, because I think high stakes hierarchizes those as being more meaningful. So I like to write into the syllabus progressive versus summative. What assignments are we doing that are just showing me your progress as a learner? If we're doing learner-centric education, what is showing me your progress as an individual and how you're engaging with the material? And then what is a summative assignment that really says, we've talked about these 5 things, how can we put them all into practice? And then the last category I have here for equity practices in my classroom is leading from the front. Now, some people don't like to lead from the front. They like to rearrange the desks, right? Or move everything around, create a circle of students. I typically still lead from the front, but that's only because I'm about 17 feet tall. And so anywhere I am in the room, I look like an obelisk. So I still lead from the front, but then use students to fill in the gaps, right? And make sure to include them in the discussion, bring them in. And one of the things that I like to do to lead from the front is demystify teaching. Be transparent with my pedagogy. I have found that if I ask my students on syllabus day, like our first class meeting, how many people have been taught about the learning process? How many people know what learning is? How many of y'all know why we study, not just the night before an exam? Usually, if I have a room of 40 students, I'm getting 2 to 5 hands that are raised that say, yes, I know this. And chances are a percentage of those are also in an education or teacher program. And so I walk them through. Here's my process. Here is my teaching philosophy. Here is how I scaffold information. And here's how we're building throughout the semester. Because especially for those students, like Dr. Brody mentioned, those first generation students who sometimes enter a room and instructors might think like, oh, they just know how to learn. They should know how to learn. They should be college ready by the time they get here. Maybe they've never had this conversation. So having those conversations about learning. So I believe I have hit my time. So I'm going to stop talking because I could talk for hours. But just remind yourself that this process is never over. You're always continuing to learn. So maybe you're learning from your other faculty members, students themselves that are modeling behavior. Maybe you're coming to fabulous teach-ins sponsored by the Teaching Collective here at UTD. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. And continue to learn, continue to engage, and hopefully move forward from there. Thank you so much.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, I guess I'm the next to share. So unlike most of the panelists here, I'm not like a TA or a professor, I'm a student. So I think I'll probably share a little bit from the student's perspective. And I absolutely love a phrase that Bracken used. And he said, students as collaborators with an instructor. So I think it's a very crucial thing to know that we have a mutual responsibility, both from the instructor and from the students. So let me just share a little bit about myself. So I have 2 layers of identification. Not like to do security, but 2 layers of identification. So number 1 is, so I'm a student at UT Dallas. Again, I'm a student. And I am a research assistant for the Center for Asian Studies. And I was shocked by Dr. Khan's presentation. She said there are like 40% of the UTD populations are Asians. But just from my experience for the Center for Asian Studies, one of our main struggle is to allow students to know the various campus resources. So students doesn't know. I think it is a very important thing for us to consider, like how do we allow the students to know and to use those campus resources, because it's out there. The student have no idea. So another thing I kind of want to share is that, second of all, I'm an international student. So from a different cultural background, had like different struggles and various benefits for learning and equity sharing. So just to share one of the stories I had when I just came to the US. I came from China, as you might have heard. And when I just came, I was super self-conscious about my accent. I would try my best to sound like a native speaker, but then that kind of hindered most of my performances in class. But then I noticed most of the people, first of all, most of the people doesn't really care about the accent. They just care about the content, what I'm speaking. And second of all, is after I realized I had this self-consciousness about my accent, I had this shame, I had this fear. I thought it's out of pride or fear. But then, like knowing more about my own culture made me more aware of why I had this behavior. So in China, we have like 4 intonations, and even the tilt and the tone makes it totally different. So that makes my self-awareness and self-consciousness more reasonable, and that made me feel more relief. So I think that is very, very important aspect for students to know and to understand ourselves, as well as understand equity as a general concept. And then a second thing I want to share is that coming back to my struggle with the language, I think there is something I want to point out is that when my instructor actually told me what is right and what is wrong, that actually helped me to learn. So sometimes I'm just, one of my high school teachers, she used to just pick my essays apart, and it doesn't feel good. It sometimes even feels a little bit discouraging, but it is absolutely the time that I learn the most. So I think it is necessary, but it's important for us to consider what is the balance between encouraging students' voice and not compromising their learning outcome. So I think that is also an important factor to consider. And also, I was thinking also from the idea of students as collaborators. So there are, I think, 2 layers for knowing the students and understanding the student. So first of all is knowing stats. I think that's absolutely important. But second of all is to knowing the student personally. That is also important. So I think most of my classroom experience, the best outcome starts with knowing the professor personally, not just as a someone like a figure, mystical figure standing in a classroom, standing in front. Knowing a professor, actually taking advantage of the office hours and just talking to the professor helped me to grow more than just merely listening to lectures, just sit there motionlessly, taking notes and just listen. I think that is also a very important aspect. So I'm just considering various things that as a student, what we can do to make ourselves know and make ourselves understood. Just to collaborate with our instructors. So how do we raise this awareness in students that there are resources out there and there are professors out there that are willing to help? And how do we encourage students, not just ourselves, but also our fellow students, to share about ourselves, to make ourselves known? Instead of just sitting there and waiting for someone to reach out to us, how can we reach out to them, to others? I think that's something that I'm considering as a student. Yeah, so I think other panelists has more expertise than I do, and that's pretty much all I can think of now.
Thank you so much, panelists. And no, Iris, like we very much appreciate having you, the student's perspective. And that's why we intentionally asked for you to join the panel, is because we think that that all insight, and that's what our goal of is in developing this panel, was really to pull from a variety of expertise and point of views. And so each of you came with that. And so thank you so much. So attendees, please fill the chat with your questions. I do know that there was some questions about contract grading. It sounds like that is new to some of our faculty. And so for those who've used it, if you have anything you want to talk about in regards to it, that'd be awesome. And thank you for the resource, Dr. Unruh.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. This is something that came to me, this book, Labor-Based Contract Grading, during my sabbatical project last fall. And it was aligning so well with what Sobia and I were writing about in the book. So specifically for composition classrooms, which is what so Anoy's book is about, and his blog there has full text versions of all of his books, I think, and lots of resources. So the way I use it in composition classrooms is that I've had to modify it to fit the institutional requirements of Dallas College, because we are required to do progress reporting and to post grades regularly. Most contract grading, the students just don't get a grade at all until the end of the semester. So I do it per essay, and they have a contract for each essay. And there's certain requirements, such as number of sources that they're using, having a certain word count, things like that. But the most important thing is revision. And they have to show me through, tracking their changes on their essays, a certain number of revisions and drafts of their essay. And the purpose is really more focusing on their improvement, more so than the quality of their writing, and that they are putting labor into the class more so than that they reach a certain level of quality. And I don't want to get into, because it would take forever, but Anoy's book really highlights how things like standard edited American English and writing has been used as a form of white supremacy in the United States, and how the grading system that we think of is traditionally racist. And so this is really kind of breaking away from that and focusing on labor instead of quality, and improving and learning instead of mastery of a certain skill, I guess. And I've had success with it. It has been, there's a lot to learn. This is my first semester using it with English 1301 students. I used it with 1302 students last semester. And it's a learning process. There's a lot going on there. And it takes a lot of explaining, because students are not used to it at all and are scared and worried and not sure what to do. But I find this is also a way, I think there was a question in the chat about like, how do you do the, give students their voice back in your composition grading? How do you grade that? And so this is one of the ways I do that, is I tell my students, it's about communicating. And as long as your writing is understood, I'm far more concerned with that you are communicating your message effectively, than that you have all of the grammar absolutely correct. And we do a lot of peer review, and that's, as part of the revision process. And I have my students, tell each other if there's something you don't understand, or it's confusing at all, because that's the most important part. That's the purpose of writing, is to communicate. So I recommend checking out contract grading. It is different, but most all of my students last semester told me that they had to work harder on their writing with the grading contract than traditional grading, which I kind of amazed at. But almost all of them said that they felt like their writing improved more in that English 1302 class than English 1301 with traditional grading.
And for me, I think I'm the one who brought this up. So I don't use contract grading necessarily in the strictest sense. It sounds like Dr. Unruh has had a lot of success using it more to its full potential than I do, but I use it kind of as an influence, which is to say that for me, I think there's certain limits to not offering a grade until the very end of the semester. So for me, I'm like, okay, that's where we have this contract between the students and myself that says, okay, if we have 12 of these short assignments, then my expectation for your effort is that you need to submit 10, right? Or that the way that I'm grading them, the rubric is, are you demonstrating effort in connection to the course materials? And are you demonstrating improvement, rather than, again, like Dr. Unruh is saying, like grading for those little details that so many of us are used to grading when it comes to written assignments. So that's how I kind of use it as an influence, but have not yet myself dipped all the way into the pool of contract grading. So I've used it as kind of like a starting point for me.
Awesome. And Dr. Brody put in the chat the CTL is going to be having an upcoming event on this. So if this is something you want to dive in deeper to, be sure to attend that event. Thank you, Dr. Brody. All right. We also had in the chat a first-time TA ask, what's the best way to look at grading with a student's upcoming midterm? How do you know how effective is effective?
We're all stumped by the question. So I'll give my 2 Ps and maybe others can join in. It's always good, in my experience, to start with the end in mind. If you have the outcomes that you want for an assignment, a chapter, a module, and overall the entire course identified first, then you start backtracking from there and designing your course and your assessments, multiple assessments geared towards meeting and reaching those outcomes. That has been the most effective way that I have learned, that has been effective for me in my teaching. If your students are meeting outcomes, and how you design your outcomes will be helpful in identifying if students are succeeding. One thing I would caution is not to have high stakes assignments like Dr. Brody already mentioned, to only have assessments due at midterm and final. They should be, equity practice is to have multiple assignments throughout the semester, giving our students, who we've collectively identified as having intersectional and multiple identities, an opportunity to succeed. And to showcase their learning through multiple different types of assignments, sizes of assignments, all kinds of things. So I'll let my colleagues jump in.
For myself, as when I was a new TA, I followed the same procedure that Dr. Khan is saying. I asked myself, what is the overall objective for this course? Not just in terms of course content, but also where do I want them to be as people, as individuals, and what do I want them to have thought through? And so then just kind of doing a backtracking to say, okay, so at the midpoint, let's say if we're talking about a midterm exam, a midterm project, a midterm written assignment, hopefully we're varying those assignments as Dr. Khan mentioned, then where do they need to be 8 or 9 weeks into the semester? If we're doing a 16-week semester, where do they need to be at that point to make sure that we're still continuing toward that goal? And so I think this is where you kind of build in some of your intentional grace, which is to say you should not expect perfection at the midpoint. Perfection in the standard, like if you get 100%, that was so many air quotes, but if you get 100% on something, that's not what we should really be expecting or anticipate at a midpoint in a full course, because our goals for the full course should take the entirety of that time. I hope that's beneficial, and also had a lot of air quotes.
Awesome.
So I also want to just jump in real fast. Remembering back many, many years ago to when I was a first-time TA. Also, give yourself some grace, because it's tough your first semester, and it's not just tough your first semester, but especially your first semester. You're also learning. So don't beat yourself up if you don't have everything figured out at this point, because it takes time to figure out your teaching philosophy, and it takes time to figure out some of these grading techniques. And I've been teaching since I started as a TA in 2003. So I've been teaching, almost 20 years now. And I just, came up on the contract grading last fall. So these are, you're always going to be learning. You're always going to be trying new things as an instructor. And I want you not to, because I remember that I thought I had to have it all figured out that first semester, and it was a lot of stress. on me as a TA to try to be the perfect teacher when it was my very first time. So so don't stress yourself out about having to be the best TA or the best grader at this point in your career.
I'm just going to add one more thing because it reminded me of what Brecken and Iris were saying before about students as collaborators. And for me, also, some of the best pivots in my teaching career have come from student ideas that have improved my classroom experience, have made students happier, have cut down on like the time I spent grading. Like, so my life got better, their lives got better. And so for me, having a final reflection assignment in every single one of my classes that's separate from like the course evaluation has just made me change my class every semester, I think, for the better, just figuring out what works and what doesn't. And I just wanted to acknowledge all the great things in the chat that were said about like incorporating other voices and free resources as well. Students always suggest that too, so those are great ways to meet students where they're at.
Awesome. So you mentioned the free resources. Do y'all have any suggestions or ideas that you'd like to share about like where to find great resources or the utilization of that?
Kendra and I, and Kendra and I have been working together. Dr. Andrew and I have been working together for a long time. Our teaching profession started a year apart. So I think together we were most impacted by joining communities. She and I were hugely impacted by Achieving the Dream, which is focused on helping students in large urban, but also tribal and HBCU colleges, and focused on community colleges. But finding your community and being a part of it, engaging in it, that has been the most impactful resource as a teacher, as a faculty member. And that could be different for everyone in this group. It could be, but finding your heart in a place that, exploring. Maybe it's the Center of Teaching and Learning here at UT Dallas. Maybe it's the CCRC or your discipline, whatever your discipline cohort is. But getting into pedagogy, and there are so many institutes nationally that are now looking at equity or share where you can go and listen and learn about best practices. So that has been, as an educator, the most impactful for me. Yeah.
I would suggest asking your colleagues. That's where I get probably 90% of my ideas and practices that I do in the classroom is I go to my colleagues and I say, hey, I'm having such a hard time teaching the media analysis essay. Does anybody have any suggestions? Like, these are the things that aren't quite working. What's your experience been? How can we possibly change this? And I have been surrounded by great colleagues at Dallas College. And when I was a grad student, my fellow TAs and we used to talk about these issues a lot. So I've really stolen a lot of their ideas over the years and modified them when they needed to be maybe tweaked more towards my style or what I was trying to do. And then I also share freely with my colleagues because I know how important that is. And I try to make sure, and when I was learning about the contract grading, I've been talking to colleagues like, how do you think this can work for us? And this is what I'm trying. Do you have ideas? And that has definitely been the most important thing for me and free resource to helping my teaching.
I would like to offer to anyone who's in the room who is perhaps a graduate student or a teaching assistant, or is an undergraduate student as well. Really, again, I think we're all circling back to community here, but finding those instructors who you can really get to know, who seem to be a part of a community, and using the opportunity, especially if you're a TA, if you're working with them as an assistant, or if you're teaching your own class, but you have a supervisor, getting to know them, finding out their practices, and like Dr. Unruh said, steal them. Stealing is really important here. I know that Dr. Fisher, who I've worked with before, who's here with us today and has her hand raised, has implemented amnesty deadlines in her classroom, which is something that I had never heard of before working with her. And then I had the opportunity to implement them and found them very successful in allowing students to be able to better manage their time and better fulfill their educational journey, and better meet my goal to view students as collaborators who are working together on a project if they have the opportunity of leniency and intentional grace. So that is something that can be done as well, is work with those people who, if you're in a role like mine, are your supervisors and mentors. Again, help demystify them, and they hopefully will be wanting to work with you and attend to your journey to make students' journeys better.
Dr. Fisher, I see your hand is up. Do you have something you want to add?
Well, I had a question, if that's okay. Thanks, y'all. This is so good, Megan. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. You do so much work already for the school, and then to put this amazing teaching together. Thank you so much to the CTL and for all of these awesome panelists. I have a question. And, you know, I would love to hear from Iris, but I would also love to hear from everyone. So I have done most of my teaching here at UTD, and most of that teaching has been under conditions of overlapping crises of public health, right? Lethal pandemic, racism, sexism, transphobia. Like, I mean, I've just basically taught in crisis, and so my syllabi are forged in crisis, right? So in some ways, I like to think that they are universal design, but really they were just this sort of frantic effort to try to hold everyone together, recognizing that we are all right in crisis in distinct ways, especially knowing the impoverishment of many of our students. We have many students who are parents, we have many students who are working, right? So how can the class serve them and create space for them to come as they are, right? And to get what they need. So, but that said, I'm really struggling with when I return to small seminar style classes, post pandemic, with like heavy air quotes, right? I've heard on the one hand from students that, you know, that the online option is really liberating, and it gives them a way to learn on their own time, right? And to fit it into their schedules. But I've also heard from students who really need that structure, right? Who actually need, they need structure to attend class in order that they learn better in person, but they know that if the online option is there, then they will just, you know, check back with the lecture or conversation later. And that's not good for their mental health, right? Like staying in bed is not good for their mental health. They need that sort of reason to come into class. And especially in these small groups, they're not really easily hybridized, right? It kind of depends on everyone talking together, sharing a space together. So it seems that like for universal design, what these small seminar style classes, students have fundamentally opposed needs, right? Some students really need to be in class. And that's good for their mental health. And some students need that online option, and that's good for their mental health and their lives, right? So I'm just curious if folks have thought this through. Iris, if you have any thoughts, like how do we kind of resolve this? How do we resolve these issues of supporting students in these conditions of ongoing public health crises?
Well, I guess my primary thought is, first of all, me personally, I'm a in-person learner. So the online option can be convenient, especially time-wise and travel-wise. That can be a very good option. So I think we can keep it as an option. But definitely I would maybe I'm biased. I will go towards the in-person option. Yeah, I can understand that in the same classroom, students can have opposing needs and it's very real. But I would say just from some of my professors, what I see them doing, and I really appreciate it, is that they have a certain, for example, you can miss 5 classes with no excuse. Or some professor offer that I can record this lecture for you and you can go back and review it. So I think some of those practices are good. I'm just thinking, what is the right balance to achieve? I think that's the key.
I was just going to chime in and say that the individual faculty making decisions, like that's always a little bit hard. But if we zoom out and we're talking to our colleagues and we know that we have options for our students that are within our department or our school that meet the needs, that can make it a lot less stressful for each individual person to figure out, like, in this class, do I have to stream and meet the needs of building a community of like 9 to 15 students? And so if that doesn't work for a student, that there is an option for them. So I always say, my psychology of prejudice class, the magic is in the class sessions. Nothing bad will happen to you if you cannot show up. There's no attendance, but the expectation is that most people are there for every class. And that's like the community, standard that we agree on. But I say, if you really need an online class, I teach a kind of similar class in the summer, or my colleagues teach an online class that will better meet your needs. It's not exactly the same thing, but if we're making sure that we're all working together for access and equity at a department level, I feel like it's much less stressful. And I think we've done that. We've tried to do that in our department.
All right, I'm going to throw out one more question and then we will wrap up. We had one that said, how do we overcome the notion that our classes have to be rigorous and that we show that by having some students fail, this is a common notion? So I know you, Dr. Khan, you addressed it in the chat, but wanted to expand in case anybody else wanted to say anything in regards to that.
I also put a link in the chat to an article about why we should cancel the word rigor. And I know that Dr. Sathi, one of the writers of that article, and has recently published a book. She's written a journal article about that topic. I have not read it yet. I have it on my list of things I want to read soon. I just came across it, I think last week, because there was a very heated discussion on Twitter last week about rigor and this idea that we are still trying to uphold in the ivory tower or whatever, that some students deserve to be here and some students don't. And rigor is the way that we weed out those students who aren't supposed to be here. So kind of coming to this new equitable and justice-focused way of looking at the classroom and looking at things like ungrading and contract grading, different ways of grading, so that we are not promoting something like rigor, which could be used as a way to, again, promote white supremacy or to weed out students who don't have access to the same resources that other students do, and therefore they're unable to succeed when they get to a college setting. So those are my recommendations to kind of see some of those conversations that are happening in scholarship right now around rigor, and that goes back to ungrading and kind of breaking away from those traditional ideas about how to grade student work.
I'm going to jump in and tie rigor conversation into access. I showed some data and I questioned who are we serving in the Dallas, North Texas community. The question of access is so important in North Texas, especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where UTD is. The only other university that is close by is Southern Methodist University, which is a private institution, much, much more expensive. And then UT Arlington is a good hour away. University of North Texas in Denton is a good hour away. So if we think, and then there are other smaller institutes that are also private, I think. If we think in terms of access, I identified that majority of the Hispanic students in the community, and I don't go into the Dallas Community College, which has 40% of their students are Hispanic, they are not coming to UT Dallas because of a myriad of reasons, right? The rigor aspect, that's actually on the data set that I explored on SAT, ACT, all other kinds of scores that is the gatekeeper of students coming into UTD. And if those who do make it through, let's assume, despite all the barriers that we know culturally, historically, are part of communities that are trying to emerge and become empowered, those who do make it through might be working full time, might be caring for loved ones, and that doesn't mean only children, caretakers, they have shared homes, shared responsibilities. The only way they may have access to completing their bachelor's degree is through online access. So what I'm questioning myself and asking all of us to consider is that while we are now serving what I call traditional university students that are full-time in school, but that's not representative of the community. It is imperative that we create access points for students who may not traditionally come to school, that make up the majority of our population. 10 years from now, we will be in a position to say a huge population is uneducated. Whose responsibility will it be then in 20 years? Because we have created these arbitrary and intentional barriers to access, whether it's to the university or then those who are admitted by the schedule of classes we create. So I'm not proposing a solution. I'm glad these conversations are happening within departments in conjunction and I think with students as co-collaborators on what do they need. Do classes need to be offered like this with a camera and a light and also in person? So those who click in can have access through Zoom or Teams or whatever option they have, and those who prefer to be in person or have that option. Community is important in either case, and it's the challenge, I think, of the new workforce. The same challenges are in the workforce right now, remote versus being in person. The same challenges are here for educational institutes. So I'm not presenting solutions. I'm raising questions that I think all of us are grappling with. And I think we will be grappling with these for some years to come until we start to see more access and more success.
Well, on that note, thank you all so much, attendees, for coming and making equity in the classroom a priority for you. Panelists, thank you for taking the time, and Dr. Khan for your keynote. Thank you for preparing such wisdom and insight to share about your experience. We appreciate you. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the CTL again for their co-sponsorship of this program, along with the ANH Teach-In collective group and the community that is, and the support of Dr. Fisher in handling the financials for today's event. I really appreciated that. So thank you all, and we look to see you. We're going to put into the chat a email address. If you have any comments that you'd like to pass on about either how much you enjoyed this or suggestions for the future, we would be thankful for that. So have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all.